Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. One of our favorite things to do here in the mid portion of the week is to not necessarily give you those winners, those against the spread locks. That's for Thursday. It's to go inside the matchup and really look at the places where the biggest games of the weekend are going to be decided. And dadgummit, it don't get bigger than Ohio State going to play Oregon. It's number 2 versus number 3 in the AP poll. It is two of the top teams in terms of the odds makers' thoughts on who's going to end up winning the Big Ten. A lot to be able to handle, a lot to be able to weigh. And so I guess I want to start with you, Danny, because when you're looking at Ohio State, going into Autzen Stadium, what are the things that you think Ohio State needs to be focused on if it wants to be sure that it emerges on the other side of this colossal battle still with a 0 in the loss column?
I know we've talked about this a lot, and I keep wondering what Ohio State is holding back, right? Have they been holding some things back, not wanting to show the Ducks because they knew this game was circled on their calendar for a while? I did notice that Will Howard's carries against Iowa took a little bit of a jump. And I do think that will be something that Chip Kelly will probably implement more just to keep Oregon's defense a little bit honest, open up a little bit more of those lanes for Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. It'll open up things in the pass game. And I think it opens up everything. I mean, go back and listen to Kirby Smart when he talked about how do you defend Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams on the outside. He's like, when you have a running quarterback, it's almost impossible because your safety has to get involved. Then you can't double over the top. And with a weapon like Jeremiah Smith, I think it'll be the same way. So that's kind of one of the tweaks that I think you might see is more Will Howard rushing the football. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I'll be curious because Oregon's offensive line, it's gotten healthier and it's gotten more consistent. After struggling the first couple games, the last 3 games, they've given up 0 sacks. And I think that's a lot for Dillon Gabriel getting more comfortable in the system. But how can they throw off Dillon Gabriel in this highly timing system where it's rhythm-based, you're getting the ball out of your hands? How can they disrupt that rhythm and make sure that he can't get into a flow where he's dinking and dunking it down the field and then boom, he takes a big shot? Because they've been a pretty big play offense too. So I'm very, very fascinated about this matchup and some of the chess match that's going to be taken on.
Danny, couldn't agree more, man. I'm really fascinated to see just what Chip Kelly has held back. And also, like what Will Stein, the offensive coordinator for Oregon, has held back. Like Oregon could have easily chose to beat UCLA by 50 if they wanted to. And they basically just coasted the second half of that game. Like they have struggled early in the season, in large part due to offensive line injuries. Some of those guys are back. Some of those guys, unfortunately, it looks like will not be back, at least not anytime soon. But in recent weeks, like they have looked a good bit better and have just basically coasted the second half of games. And to me, that is holding things back in preparation of this big matchup. Let's go back to just 2 weeks ago when Kirby Smart was flabbergasted at halftime by how much empty formation stuff Kalen DeBoer broke out on him to build a 28-0 lead. Like, this is the reason. I think a lot of coaches watched what Michigan did last year, okay? And if you're Ohio State, like, do we really want to borrow from Michigan? Well, they won the national title, so maybe not a terrible idea. Michigan treated like the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season last year like a preseason and showed nothing. So I think what Ohio State did last week against Iowa was purposeful. They didn't have to do that. They could have scored and beat Iowa without running Will Howard. What are they going to have off that, right? Now Oregon's got a little bit of stuff to rep. Obviously, Dan Lanning has faced Chip Kelly before because Chip Kelly was the head coach of UCLA for a while and still the primary play caller there in Los Angeles. So he's seen this before, but I guarantee you Chip's got some stuff cooked up. And on the other side, Oregon is 78th in plays of 20-plus yards this year. Like, I know Dillon Gabriel doesn't have much of an arm, and that's why he's in college still and not the NFL. But how does Ohio State get that to continue? Or on the flip side, how does Oregon find a way to break that trend? Because can you drive on this Ohio State defense? I don't think so.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. Like, if you look at this, Oregon comes into the game ranked 70th nationally in offense in explosive rate overall, not just over 20 yards, but in running and throwing the game. And on the other side, Ohio State's defense is second nationally as far as explosive play rate allowed. So that is going to be something where if Oregon's going to figure that out this week, it's not going to be easy to do so. But going back towards the quarterback situation and the offenses and how they've held things back, I think one of the interesting aspects is Both of these teams have transfer quarterbacks. Ohio State also has a brand new offensive coordinator. And I think it takes time for a play caller to learn a quarterback. And this isn't a situation where these guys have been backups on the roster for the last few years. So you've been able to work with them in practice. You're kind of learning on the fly. And I feel like, just anecdotally from what I have seen, Chip Kelly and Will Howard are more in sync, I think, than Will Stein and Dillon Gabriel are to this point with what they want to do as far as what they're good at, the strengths and their weaknesses. Because one fun fact here is, well, it's not very fun if you're Oregon. Bo Nix threw 3 interceptions all of last season. Dillon Gabriel has thrown 3 red zone interceptions in the last 2 games. That has been a problem for Oregon. And I think another situation where when you look at this matchup, Ohio State, we know about Jeremiah Smith. We know about Emeka Egbuka. They have fantastic receivers. And that's been a huge bonus for Will Howard trying to learn this offense, because you could just throw the ball to one of those guys and watch them go be amazing. I have not really been impressed at all by Oregon's receivers. Outside of Tez Johnson, they really haven't shown much on tape that I've watched. I think Evan Stewart, who was a transfer in, who was a big name, former highly rated recruit, really has not made much of a noticeable impact in this offense. And I think it has hurt Oregon overall, because as they've gotten into conference play, their offensive line has gotten healthier, which in turn has helped their run game really improve. But their passing game's gotten a lot worse, because now that they're facing actual talented defenses, their receivers are not having nearly the same kind of success in getting space and getting open. And given Dillon Gabriel, who, as you mentioned, Bud, doesn't exactly have the most zip on his ball, the kind of separation that he needs to fit some of these throws in without the defense getting there to break it up. And then when you get to the lines of scrimmage here, I mean, compared to my expectations for both units coming into the year, I've been more impressed with Ohio State's offensive line than I have been Oregon's defensive line, but I still think this is going to be the first real true test for both of these units, so it's hard to come to a conclusion there. But on the flip side, even though Oregon's offensive line is improving, the interior still looks pretty vulnerable, and Ohio State's got some very good guys on that defensive line, particularly on the inside. I would expect you're going to see Ohio State bringing a lot of pressure in the A-gaps in this game and getting into Dillon Gabriel's face quickly. And it's going to be a big question mark to see how Oregon can handle that.
All right. So look, I'm sensing a lot of questions right now. So Tom, so what is on the checklist for Oregon to win this football game? Because, we're nobody's giving any picks out, but we're all kind of like sensing that this matchup is the same way, where, you've got an Ohio State team where it feels like they've held everything back, and an Oregon team that so far, in terms of form, in terms of performance, maybe hasn't quite hit everything. And in a way where I'm not thinking that Oregon held much back. I mean, second half against Michigan State, second half against UCLA, but I do think you're spot on right there. So Tom, what needs to happen? What's on the to-do list for the Ducks if they're going to be able to win?
They're going to have to run the ball a lot and effectively. And I think that it's a weird situation. You think of Oregon and their offense and what they have been, and it's like, okay, this is an explosive unit who can put points up on the board. But that has not been the case with this Oregon team so far this year. I think they have downgraded at quarterback. I owe Bo Nix an apology for calling Dillon Gabriel a left-handed Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix has proven he was a better player in this offense so far. But I just think that with Jordan James, you're going to want to lean on your run game. You've been doing it very effectively the last few weeks, and you want to keep that Ohio State offense off the field as much as possible, because I don't care who you have on defense. You're probably not going to win a whole lot of matchups against what the Buckeyes are throwing out there across the field with the skill position players they have and the strength they have on their offensive line. So I think you got to control the tempo, control the game, take care of the football, because they were able to survive 3 red zone turnovers against Michigan State and UCLA, including one that was a pick 6. You do that against Ohio State, you're cooked. You've got no chance, because they will take advantage of it. And I also think another key factor here is we have seen Ohio State kind of like a boxer feel out its opponent in the first half of games and then come out in the second half and completely light them up. In fact, they're outscoring opponents 84-3 in the third quarter. There's a fun stat for you guys to keep in mind. But I just think that if I'm Oregon, I have to be prepared for that punch, because they have been one of the best teams at adjusting in the second half. So I have to have a counter ready. So I think it's a very difficult path for the Ducks to manage, but I do think they have enough talent and they have a good enough coaching staff where I have to give them a decent shot to do so.
Both these teams are super talented. Tom had most of the stuff on my checklist. The one thing I would say is, if I'm Oregon, I am charting what Chip did at UCLA, and I'm looking to see what he hasn't broken out yet this year. We talked some QB run game. They put that on film last week. The two things that he has not shown a lot of this year that he did show at UCLA. One, unbalanced. I almost guarantee you Ohio State's going to give Oregon a dose of unbalance come Saturday, because we saw how Kalen DeBoer did it in the rematch last year when Washington played Oregon. I think we get a lot of trips into the boundary stuff. That whole Saban tree of defense, they do have trouble with trips into the boundary. So when you have three receivers to the short side of the field, because of the width, the college hash marks, and some of the adjustments and calls you make with some of their coverage stuff, that can kind of screw with them. That's how you kind of steal an explosive play. We actually saw DeBoer do this to Kirby Smart's defense just 2 Saturday nights ago. So I think you'll see that. The other thing is they've run some of like the RPO stuff with like the bubble game, but they haven't really done a whole lot of the vertical RPO stuff. So how does Oregon handle that? And on the flip side, Jim Knowles, the DC, has a tendency to bring a lot of pressure and to play very aggressively, but Oregon's receivers are small, right? And their tight ends have not been the threat that they thought they were going to be. Teams have had success against Oregon this year, just saying, hey, we're going to keep two guys high. If you want to run the ball, cool. Like, we'll let you do it a little bit in compressed space. We think our bigger people are better, and that Dillon Gabriel has trouble fitting the ball in really tight windows, and your receivers aren't very big. So you're a little bit smaller of a team. We don't want to let you get over the top with us at that speed. We're going to try to sit back and win in the red zone, spin that red zone roulette wheel, and force some field goals. So, like, can Knowles not just blitz all the time? Like, he's done a nice job of that this year. In a really big game, that's usually his tendency, is to go hyper aggressive. Can he stick with a conservative game plan, let his front four win?
When do we become an Ohio State Buckeye podcast? Is this a Big Ten show, or is this a Buckeye? I feel like the way this is being talked about, we're completely forgetting that the Oregon Ducks are ranked 3rd. They are undefeated. And I will remind people, who is the best quarterback? Who's the best offense that this Ohio State defense has faced yet? I mean, they haven't. They haven't shut anybody down. And I know that Ashton Jeanty ran wild on Oregon's defense, but he's been running wild on everybody's defense. So that game, which was all of a sudden was like, the most points they've given up outside that game is 14. Now, I don't expect them to hold the Buckeyes offense to just 14 points, but I do feel like Oregon has slowly been getting better as they've gotten more continuity, as they've gotten healthier, and Dillon Gabriel's gotten more comfortable at the system. The throws that he made in the red zone last week, I think they were not good throws, but I also don't think he'll make them in this game. I wonder if those were some of those feeling out the process. What can I work here? Still getting used to his wide receivers. He cannot turn the ball over. And I do wonder if that recipe, if they don't hit on the big plays, can they, with a very experienced, very accurate underneath thrower, can they work the tight ends, work the flats, work the shallow crosses, the underneath game, and try to do that, drive the length of the field, and keep the time of possession going, combining that with the run game and keep it away from that high-powered Ohio State offense?
Well, if you want picks for this big-time matchup, of course, the Locks episode of the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Cover 3 podcast, will be coming up on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And coming up on the other side, we'll get you set for big time on CBS as Penn State travels to the Coliseum to play USC, taking you inside that matchup and more next.